My name is Sierra, and if you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have someone else sign their name at the bottom and then set it on fire, then you need to hear this. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void, so if my story resonates with you, let me know in the comments. Subscribe, and let's talk about how you take back what's yours. For 20 years, I was the lead architect at a firm I didn't just join, I helped build it from the ground up. The walls knew my voice, the foundation had my name, figuratively, carved into its frame. For 10 of those years, I mentored Maxwell. He came to me a kid with a good eye and a shaky hand, full of ambition that outpaced his talent. I saw potential. I saw a hunger that, if aimed correctly, could build wonders. I poured everything I knew into him. I taught him how to see not just the building but the space between the lines, the way a shadow falls at noon, the human story a structure tells. I gave him the keys to a kingdom I had built with my own 2 hands. When our firm, Sterling and Vance, though the Vance had retired a decade ago, leaving only his name on the letterhead, won the bid for the landmark New City Library, it was the culmination of my entire career. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement, a cathedral to knowledge, with soaring glass atriums and cantilevered reading nooks that seemed to float over the city park. It was my design, my vision, my soul rendered in concrete and steel. But I was the lead, the name on the door. I had to manage the firm, bring in the new business, keep the entire ecosystem running. So I did what any proud mentor would do. I put Maxwell in charge of the day-to-day. I handed him my masterpiece and said, "Make it real." I trusted him completely. It was my single greatest mistake. The call came on a Tuesday. The kind of gray, listless Tuesday where the sky can't decide between rain and just oppressive humidity. I was in a budget meeting, arguing over the price of Italian marble for a bank lobby, when my phone buzzed with the city commissioner's number. I smiled, assuming it was a progress update. The commissioner's voice was hollow. "There's been an incident at the library site, Sierra. A balcony. A collapse." The world went silent. The argument over marble faded into a dull hum. I was on site in 15 minutes, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. The scene was worse than I could have imagined. Dust, shouting, the frantic energy of disaster. The west-facing terrace, a signature element of my design, meant to be a quiet place for reflection overlooking the botanical gardens, had sheared away from the main structure. A 50-ton slab of concrete and rebar had pancaked onto the plaza below. The investigation was swift and brutal. It pointed to a fatal design flaw, a miscalculation in the tensile strength of the support connections, an error so fundamental, so amateurish, that it was impossible. My signature was on every approved blueprint. I knew the numbers. I knew the load-bearing capacity of every beam in my sleep. It wasn't possible. The board meeting was a week later. I walked in expecting a war room, a strategy session on how to handle the fallout, how to support the investigation, how to fix this. Instead, I found a firing squad. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, his eyes red-rimmed and brimming with what I, in my naivety, thought were real tears. He looked broken. He presented a series of drafts to the board, large format prints spread across the mahogany. He pointed to a detail, a specific structural joint. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I caught it," he said. "I caught it late, but I flagged it. I told Sierra it was a risk. I begged her to reconsider the materials. But we were over budget, and she insisted. She signed off on it herself." He held up a blueprint, and there it was. My digital signature, crisp and undeniable, on a plan that was not mine. A plan that was criminally negligent. A plan that was a cheap, ugly, and dangerous perversion of my design. The board members, men I'd known for decades, refused to meet my eyes. I was fired. No severance, no discussion. Just a sterile 2-sentence email from HR confirming my termination for gross negligence. I was escorted out of the building I had helped create, a box of my personal effects in my arms. my name already being chiseled off the metaphorical door. Maxwell watched me go from his office window, the tears miraculously gone, replaced by a cold, quiet ambition that I finally belatedly recognized. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I am not just an architect. I am a preservationist. For years I had kept a private encrypted cloud drive, a digital vault. In it were time-stamped, digitally signed copies of every single blueprint, every revision, every email, every memo I had ever produced. My originals. The real ones. They proved without a shadow of a doubt that Maxwell had secretly swapped my meticulously engineered designs for a cheaper, faster and lethally unsafe version to cut costs and boost his own profit-sharing bonus. He had gambled with human lives to make himself look good on a balance sheet. And he had used my name, my reputation, as his shield. I sat in my car for an hour in the parking garage, the silence of my professional death ringing in my ears. The disgrace was a physical weight, but then a quiet heat flushed up my neck. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder. It was the calm, clear certainty of a structural engineer who has just found the single fatal point of failure in a corrupt design, and who knows exactly how to bring the whole rotten structure down. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was an assistant from the city's engineering review board. The board had reviewed the incident report, she said. They had some follow-up questions. They were requesting a private meeting with me. The game wasn't over. The game had just begun. I remember one specific argument they had at a city planning gala. I was a teenager, bored and sipping a Shirley Temple. My father and Arthur were debating the merits of a new composite material. My father saw it as a cheap shortcut. Arthur saw it as an efficient innovation. Their voices got louder, attracting a small crowd. Finally, my father slammed his hand on the table. He said, "The materials have to tell the truth. Arthur, the moment you ask them to lie about the weight they're holding, the whole structure becomes a house of cards. A building has to be honest." Years later, after my father passed away, Arthur Vance sent me a letter, a real handwritten letter. It said, "Your father was a pain in my neck for 30 years. He was stubborn and infuriating, and he cost me a fortune in bids because he refused to be practical. He was also the best damn architect this city has ever seen. The city is safer because of the buildings he refused to build. Don't ever forget that." That memory, that letter, became my catalyst. Sitting there on my cold floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my past work, I realized what I had to do. This wasn't just about my career. It wasn't about the money. It was about the integrity of the work. Maxwell hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed the fundamental principle of our profession. He had built a lie. He had asked the materials to lie, and they had told the truth in the most brutal way possible. The grief and shame in my chest began to cool, to harden. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, clutching that phrase like a shield. It was about restoring the truth. It was about proving that the lines don't lie. The math always tells the truth. A cold resolve settled over me. I stood up, walked to my desk, and powered on my laptop. It was time to open the vault. My despair had burned away, leaving behind a focused, diamond-hard clarity. I had the proof. Now I needed a plan. The first call I made wasn't to a lawyer or a reporter. It was to Chloe. Chloe was a junior architect at the firm, sharp as a tack, with a quiet intensity that reminded me of myself 20 years ago. I'd taken her under my wing, much like I had with Maxwell, but our relationship was different. I didn't just teach her about architecture. I taught her about navigating the politics of the firm, the subtle art of getting credit for her work in a room full of men who were conditioned to speak over her. She saw the world with a clear, cynical eye that Maxwell, in his desperate need to be liked, had never possessed. She had never trusted him. She'd come to me a few times over the past year, expressing quiet concerns. She'd say, "Maxwell changed the specs on the Reading Tower glass. He said it was a value engineering choice, but the new supplier has a terrible track record. Or he's been taking a lot of lunches with the guys from Apex Concrete, the ones who always come in with the lowest, most suspicious bids. I had listened, but I had dismissed her concerns as the overcaution of a junior. I had defended him. He's learning to manage budgets, Chloe. It's part of the job. The memory of my own dismissiveness was a fresh sting of shame. I called her on her personal cell. She answered on the first ring. Sierra, are you okay? Her voice was a balm of genuine concern in a world that had turned its back on me. I'm fine, Chloe. I need to ask you something. And it has to stay between us. Absolutely, she said, without a moment's hesitation. Her loyalty was a small, bright light in the darkness. I need to know what's happening in the office. What's the mood? How is he handling it? Chloe sighed, a sound of pure frustration. He's playing the tragic hero, Sierra. He walks around the office with this heavy, world-weary look on his face. He gave a big emotional speech at the all-hands meeting yesterday, talked about a heartbreaking failure of oversights and recommitting to the sterling and Vance standard of excellence. He's positioning himself as the savior of the firm, the one who had the courage to clean house, even when it meant ousting his own mentor. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me laugh. He was using my own playbook of corporate rhetoric against me. Is anyone buying it? I asked. The senior partners are, Chloe said, her voice laced with contempt. They want an easy scapegoat and a quick resolution. They're terrified of the legal exposure. But the junior staff, the people in the trenches, the ones who actually draw the lines and run the models, we know your work. We know your standards. We know a design flaw that fundamental would never ever have left your desk. She paused. We're all scared, Sierra. He's purging anyone he thinks was loyal to you. 2 of the senior drafters from your old team were let go this morning. They were called redundancies. That's when I knew my plan had to be more than just clearing my name. It was about saving the soul of the firm and the careers of the good people being cast aside. Okay, Chloe, listen carefully. I need information, nothing that would put you at risk, just observation. I need to know who he's meeting with, which clients are getting nervous, what the chatter is. Be my eyes and ears. I will, she said. Whatever you need. My next step was to excavate my secret weapon, the archive. It wasn't just a folder of files on a commercial cloud service. It was a bespoke system I had built myself over a decade. After the near miss with the HVAC system, I had become obsessed with digital provenance. I had hired a freelance cybersecurity expert, a paranoid genius who went by the online handle Daedalus, to help me create a fortress. The system was a triple redundancy private cloud, hosted on servers in 3 different countries. Every time I completed a major revision of a design, I would upload the CAD files, the structural models, the material specifications, and all related email correspondence into a single compressed package. The package was then encrypted with a 256-bit AES key. But the real masterstroke was the final step. The encrypted package was run through a blockchain-based timestamping service. It created an immutable, publicly verifiable hash of the file and its exact time of creation. It was the digital equivalent of carving a document into a granite slab. It could not be altered. It could not be backdated. It was absolute proof of what I had designed. And when? I spent the next 2 days in a state of intense, focused activity. I compiled the evidence for the library project. There it was, my final, approved design time-stamped 6 months before the collapse. Every beam was specified correctly. The rebar configurations were perfect. The support joints used a custom-designed steel alloy from a trusted German manufacturer. I then pulled up the blueprints Maxwell had presented to the board, which Chloe had managed to discreetly photograph and send to me. The differences were horrifying. He had swapped my German steel for a cheaper, lower-grade domestic alternative. He had reduced the rebar density by almost 30%. He had altered the design of the support joints to a simpler, off-the-shelf version that was completely inadequate for the cantilevered load. It was a systematic, deliberate dismantling of every safety measure I had engineered into the structure. He had saved the firm roughly $400,000 on a $120 million project. a pittance, a rounding error. But his bonus was tied to project profitability margins. He had gambled with public safety for a bonus that was probably less than the cost of a new luxury car. The sheer vulgar cheapness of his motive filled me with a cold, clean rage. The final piece of my plan was legal. I called Evelyn Reed, a corporate lawyer I'd worked with for years. Evelyn was a shark in a tailored suit, with a mind that cut through corporate nonsense like a laser. I met her in her sterile glass-walled office overlooking the financial district. I laid it all out. The betrayal, the doctored plans, my encrypted archive. I slid a tablet across her desk, showing her the 2 sets of blueprints side by side, with the timestamps clearly visible. Evelyn looked at the evidence, her expression unreadable. She swiped through the files for 10 solid minutes without saying a word. Finally, she looked up at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Oh, Sierra," she said. "He didn't just fire you, he handed you the entire company on a silver platter." She explained the legal ramifications. This wasn't just gross negligence on his part, it was corporate fraud and potentially criminal endangerment. The city would sue the firm into oblivion. The board of directors, for their lack of due diligence, would be held liable. The firm's insurance would be invalidated. In short, it was an extinction-level event. But I told her I don't want to destroy the firm. There are good people there. I helped build that place. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Then we don't sue." "Not yet. We don't go to the press. We go to the one body that can't ignore this. The one body whose entire purpose is to prevent things like this from happening. The City Engineering Review Board. You present your evidence to them, quietly, privately. You don't make accusations. You simply present yourself as a professional seeking to correct the record. You let them connect the dots. They have subpoena power. They will launch their own official investigation. And when they do, Maxwell's lie will be exposed not by you, the bitter fired employee, but by the unimpeachable authority of the city itself." It was a brilliant strategy. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet coup. And as I left her office, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. I had the truth. I had the proof. I had an ally on the inside and a shark on the outside. And in 1 week, I had a private meeting with the City Engineering Review Board, a board on which Arthur Vance, my father's old rival, and a man who respected honest numbers above all else, still held a seat of honor. The silent takedown was about to begin. The day of the meeting, I chose my clothes like armor. A simple dark gray suit, a white silk blouse. No jewelry except for my father's old watch, its steady, quiet ticking a reminder of the man who taught me that integrity was the only foundation that mattered. I walked into the city municipal building, a place I knew well from years of permit hearings and zoning debates. This time, however, I wasn't a respected industry leader. I was a pariah, a person of interest in a major public disaster. I could feel the stares of the clerks in the hallway. I kept my head high, and my gaze straight ahead. The boardroom was an intimidating space, paneled in dark wood, dominated by a massive oval table. Seated around it were the 7 members of the Engineering Review Board. They were the high priests of the city's structural code, a collection of seasoned engineers, urban planners and architects. And at the far end, looking exactly as I remembered him from that long-ago gala, was Arthur Vance. He was older now, his hair a shock of white, but his eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, and missing nothing. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod as I took my seat. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile. It was neutral. It was an engineer waiting for the data. The chairman, a portly man named Henderson, started the proceedings. "Miss Reyes, thank you for coming. As you know, we are in the preliminary stages of our review of the library collapse. The initial report from Sterling and Vance places liability on a design flaw originating from your office. We have your official statement of denial. This meeting is an opportunity for you to provide any additional context you feel is relevant." This was my moment. I didn't come in hot. I didn't make accusations. I followed Evelyn's script. I projected an aura of calm, professional grief. I am here today not to point fingers, but to protect the integrity of the engineering record. I began, my voice even and steady. The official blueprints, the ones bearing my signature that were submitted to your board for approval, are not the blueprints I created. There has been a grave error in the documentation process. A murmur went around the table. Henderson looked skeptical. Miss Reyes, that's a very serious allegation. The documents we have were digitally signed and submitted through official channels. I know, I said. That is why I am here. What I am about to show you requires a slightly deeper look at the metadata. I placed my laptop on the table and connected it to the room's projector. On the screen, I brought up two windows, side by side. On the left was the blueprint Maxwell had used to frame me. On the right was a file from my private archive. Gentlemen, ladies, on the left is the design that led to the collapse. On the right is my final approved design. As you can see, the core structural elements are fundamentally different. I then walked them through the changes Maxwell had made. The cheaper steel, the reduced rebar, the inadequate joints. I spoke their language, the language of stress coefficients and load paths. I could see the understanding dawn on their faces. They were professionals. They could see the gross negligence in the fraudulent design, but Henderson was still resistant. How can we be certain which of these is the original? Anyone can edit a file and claim it's the real one. This is the crux of the matter, I replied, turning my attention to Arthur Vance. Sir, you and my father debated for years about the honesty of materials. I believe in the honesty of data. I brought up a third window on the screen. This is a public ledger for a blockchain timestamping service. Every time I finalized a design, I created a cryptographic hash of the file and embedded it in this public immutable ledger. It's like a digital notary, but one that can't be bribed or fooled. We can take my original file, run it through the same hashing algorithm right now, and if it matches the hash on the public ledger from 6 months ago, then it is mathematically impossible for my file to have been altered. A young tech-savvy board member's eyes lit up. He's right, Henderson. If the hash matches, it's cryptographically verified, it's ironclad. For the next 20 minutes, the board's IT expert, under the watchful eye of the entire committee, performed the verification. The room was silent except for the clicking of keys. I kept my eyes on Arthur Vance. He was leaning forward, his gaze fixed on the screen, his expression one of intense concentration. Finally, the IT expert looked up. It's a perfect match, he said. The file on Miss Reyes's drive is without question the one that was created on April 17th. The fraudulent blueprint, the one submitted to the city, was created 2 months later, on June 22nd, from a different workstation. The room erupted in quiet chaos. Henderson's face was pale. The implications were sinking in. Arthur Vance, however, was still silent. He just stared at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of my father in his eyes, that look of respect for someone who had done the work, who had shown their math. I had presented an undeniable mathematical truth. I had built a case as solid and well-engineered as any building I had ever designed. I packed up my laptop. Thank you for your time, I said. I trust the board will take the appropriate next steps to correct the public record. And I walked out. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Chloe called me, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. It's happening, Sierra. It's happening. What's happening? I asked, my heart starting to pound. A team from the city just arrived. Not the usual permit guys. These are investigators. They have a warrant. They're seizing Maxwell's computer, his files, everything. He's in his office with 2 of them, and the firm's lawyer. He looks like he's seen a ghost. The news spread through the firm like wildfire. The silent takeover was no longer silent. The first tremor had hit the foundations of Sterling and Vance. My phone started to ring. First it was former colleagues, the ones who had avoided my gaze in the grocery store. They called with tentative apologetic voices. Sierra, "We heard, we had no idea. We're so sorry." I accepted their apologies with a cool professional grace. Then, the bigger calls started coming. The clients. The first was from a developer for whom I'd designed a major residential tower, a project Maxwell had been trying to sideline me on for months. "Sierra," he said, his voice grim, "I just read the preliminary report from the city's investigation. What the hell is going on over there? We signed with Sterling and Vance. Because of you. Your name was the guarantee." The panic was beginning to spread beyond the walls of the firm. Maxwell's lie wasn't just unraveling, it was becoming a contagion, threatening to poison the entire company. And I just sat in my quiet apartment, watching the aftershocks ripple outwards, knowing that this was only the beginning. The week after my meeting with the board was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. The city's investigation, now armed with my irrefutable proof, moved with a speed and ferocity that was breathtaking. They weren't just looking at the library anymore. They were now auditing every project Maxwell had overseen in the past 2 years. Chloe was my lifeline, providing a running commentary from inside the war zone. The atmosphere at the firm had curdled from panic to a state of low-grade, toxic dread. Maxwell, she told me, had become a ghost. He barely left his office. When he did, he looked gaunt and haunted, his arrogant swagger completely gone. The partners who had so eagerly thrown me to the wolves were now in a constant state of closed-door meetings, their voices sharp and panicked through the frosted glass. The exodus began with a trickle, then became a flood. It wasn't something I initiated. I didn't make a single call to poach a client. I didn't have to. My reputation, once tarnished, was now being restored with a vengeance by the very institution that had been used to destroy it. The city's preliminary findings were leaked to the press, an anonymous tip, though I had my suspicions it came from a certain white-haired board member who believed in honest numbers. The headlines were brutal. "Fraud at Sterling and Vance. Investigation reveals forged blueprints in library collapse." My name was mentioned, but this time as the whistleblower, the victim of a depraved corporate sabotage. The first major client to officially walk was the developer of the Northgate Tower, a billion-dollar skyscraper that was set to be the jewel in the firm's portfolio. I had done the conceptual design, but Maxwell had elbowed his way into managing the project. The CEO of the development company called me at home. "Sierra, it's Tom Keller. I'm pulling the Northgate contract. I can't have my flagship project associated with a firm that's under criminal investigation for fraud." I listened, saying nothing. He continued, "I always felt the project lost its soul when you were taken off it. The new project managers, they only talked about dollars and cents. You talked about light and space. We want to know if you'd be interested in taking it on." "I have to incorporate first, Tom," I said, my voice betraying none of the triumphant shock I felt. "But if you're serious, send me a letter of intent." He laughed. "It'll be on your lawyer's desk by noon." That was the first domino. Within 48 hours, 2 more major clients had invoked the ethics clauses in their contracts and pulled their projects. The firm was hemorrhaging money, and more importantly, credibility. The brand, once a mark of prestige, was now toxic. Maxwell's desperate countermove was as clumsy as it was predictable. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. It was a cease and desist letter from the firm's high-priced lawyers. It was a masterpiece of legal bluster, accusing me of corporate espionage, tortious interference, and defamation. It threatened injunctions and lawsuits that would bury me for a generation. I scanned the document, my lips curling into a small, wry smile. It was the last, desperate roar of a dying animal. I forwarded it to Evelyn. An hour later, she replied with a one-sentence email, "Amateurs. Don't worry, I'll handle it." The next day, Evelyn sent a response to the firm's lawyers. I saw a copy. It was a work of art. It was calm, precise, and utterly devastating. It detailed the timeline of the fraud, referenced the ongoing city investigation, and pointed out that any legal action against her client, Miss Reyes, would be met with a multi-hundred-million-dollar countersuit for fraudulent inducement, defamation, and wrongful termination. But the final paragraph was the kill shot. It read furthermore, should your clients wish to pursue this matter in court, we will of course be entering into discovery, which would include the depositions of every board member regarding their due diligence, or lack thereof, in the matter of the library project's oversight. We imagine the firm's liability insurers would be most interested in their testimony. We await your reply with interest. There was no reply. The legal threats stopped. The silence from their end was more damning than any admission of guilt. The power had not just shifted, it had completely and irrevocably reversed. I was no longer the defendant, I was the prosecution, and the case was already won. The call for the final meeting came from the firm's chairman of the board. His voice, once so dismissive and cold, was now thin and pleading. "Sierra, we need to talk. We'd like you to come to the office." I agreed. I knew what this was. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. I walked into the main conference room, the same room where I had been fired in disgrace. The same board members were seated around the table, but their posture was different. They were slumped, defeated. Maxwell was there, sitting slightly apart from the others. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a month. His eyes were hollowed out, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. He wouldn't look at me. The chairman cleared his throat. "Sierra," he began, "we have made a terrible mistake. The board has reviewed the city's findings. It's clear you were wronged. We are prepared to offer you a full public apology, and we would like to offer you your position back, lead architect, and of course a significant financial settlement for your trouble." I let the offer hang in the air, the silence stretching uncomfortably. I looked at each board member, one by one. I let them see the calm, unwavering certainty in my eyes. Then I turned my gaze to Maxwell. He finally looked up, and I saw what I expected to see. Not remorse, not guilt, just fear. The fear of a man who has been caught. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "But I'm afraid I have to decline. I am no longer interested in being the lead architect at Sterling and Vance." A flicker of confusion crossed the chairman's face. He had assumed this was about getting my old job back. He couldn't conceive of a world where I didn't need them anymore. "As of this morning," I continued, "my new firm, Reyes Design Group, has been officially incorporated. My lawyer is currently finalizing contracts with the Northgate Tower, the Meridian Plaza, and the Westbrook Corporate Campus. In other words, your three largest remaining clients." A collective gasp went through the room. The blood drained from the chairman's face. "You see," I said, leaning forward slightly, "it was never about getting my old seat back at this table. It was about building a new one, a better one where the foundation is based on integrity. It wasn't about revenge, it was about a course correction." I stood up to leave. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back at Maxwell. He was staring at his hands, a broken man. "You know, Maxwell," I said, my voice soft, "I remember you gave a speech at the company retreat a few years ago. You said the most important thing an architect can do is build a lasting legacy. You were right. You have. This is it. This is your legacy. The ruin of a great firm brought down by your own greed." I walked out of that room and didn't look back. The next day, the firm announced a massive restructuring. The board of directors resigned. Maxwell was fired, and the news report mentioned he was the subject of an ongoing criminal investigation. My old firm was a shell, a ghost of its former self, a monument to the fatal design flaw of its own leadership. My vindication wasn't in their destruction, but in their irrelevance. I was in my new office, a clean, minimalist space with a single massive window overlooking the city. My team, small but brilliant, was comprised of the best people who had left Sterling and Vance, including Chloe, who was now my head of operations. We were building something new, something honest. My name was on the door, not as an employee, but as the founder. The new reality had set in. The old world was gone. I had not just survived, I had built my own. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. I know I keep saying that, and maybe some of you watching this won't believe me. Maybe you see a story of cold, calculated retaliation, and I understand that. But for me, it was never about hurting Maxwell. It was about honoring the work. It was about the fundamental truth that a structure, whether it's made of steel and glass or of trust and reputation, cannot stand on a weak or dishonest foundation. The balcony collapsed because the materials were asked to lie about the weight they were carrying. The firm collapsed for the exact same reason. My father taught me that the lines on a blueprint are a promise to the people who will live and work and learn inside those walls, a promise that they will be safe. Maxwell broke that promise. The board, in their willful blindness, allowed him to. My actions weren't about tearing them down. They were about restoring the integrity of that promise. I'm sitting in my new office now. It's quiet. The only sound is the soft hum of the servers that hold my new firm's designs. On my desk, I have a single framed object. It's not an award or a plaque. It's a printout of the blockchain verification, that long string of letters and numbers that proved my honesty. It's a reminder that in a world of lies, the truth has a unique and undeniable power. It's a reminder that you must always, always keep your own records. My story is specific: architecture, blueprints, a corporate betrayal. But the theme is universal. I know some of you have felt it. You've been overlooked, underestimated, or had your work stolen by someone who valued their own ambition more than your contribution. You've been erased from your own narrative. My message to you is this: do not let them. Do not let their lie become your reality. Your work, your integrity, your name. These are the foundations of your own life. Protect them. Archive them. And if you have to, build your own structure from the ground up, one where your value is not up for debate. Don't wait for them to give you a seat at their table. Build your own. Thank you for listening to my story. It's important for these experiences to be shared, so we all feel a little less alone in our struggles. If this resonated with you, please do me a favor and like this video. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with workplace injustice, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And of course, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because building a new world is a project that's never truly finished.